power isn't just about having a seat at the table. Sometimes it's about refusing to give one up. This is the story of Maya and Nina Washington, brilliant, successful twin sisters who found themselves in a battle at 30,000 feet. When a flight attendant told them to surrender their first-class pod seats for a white passenger, they refused. One phone call was all it took to enforce their rights, a call that ended careers and made them icons of defiance. But the victory they celebrated in the headlines hid a devastating secret. This isn't just a story about justice. It's about the catastrophic collateral damage of a battle fought without all the facts, where the karma that followed was as swift and turbulent as the flight itself. The Ascendair Polaris Lounge at JFK was an oasis of curated tranquility, a world away from the chaotic symphony of Terminal 7. It smelled of expensive leather espresso and the faint, clean scent of bergamot from discreetly placed diffusers. For Maya and Nina Washington, it was a familiar way station. At 28, the identical twins had cultivated a life that made such lounges feel less like a luxury and more like a necessity. They were a striking pair, their presence commanding a quiet, magnetic pull. Maya, the elder by 7 minutes, was dressed in a tailored charcoal pantsuit, her sharp, analytical gaze scanning financial reports on her tablet. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, intricate braid that spoke of precision and control. She was the architect of their empire, the co-founder and CEO of Nexus Health, a revolutionary biotech firm that used AI to predict genetic predispositions to disease. Nina, seated opposite her in a plush armchair, was her mirror image in form, but her counterpoint in spirit. Dressed in flowing cream-colored silk, she exuded a creative, vibrant energy. Her hair was a halo of soft curls, framing a face that was quicker to smile. As the chief marketing officer, Nina was the soul of their company, the storyteller who translated Maya's complex data into a message of hope that resonated with investors and the public alike. They were two halves of a formidable whole, the code and the charisma, the logic and the legend. Their flight, US-12 to London Heathrow, was the final leg of a triumphant tour. They had just closed a Series C funding round that valued Nexus Health at $9 billion, a figure that had the tech and financial worlds reeling. They weren't just successful, they were symbols. Young black female founders in a world dominated by old white men. They had fought for every inch of their success, navigating microaggressions and outright condescension with a grace and ferocity that left competitors breathless. Did you see the look on Henderson's face when the final wire transfer came through? Nina murmured, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. I think his jaw is still on the floor of that boardroom. Maya allowed a rare, wide grin. He told us a year ago that our projections were ambitious. I believe his exact word was quaintly optimistic. Well, his quaint optimism just funded his early retirement, and our new London R&D lab. Nina laughed the sound like wind chimes. Their conversation was easy, a shorthand language built over a lifetime of shared experiences and ambitions. They discussed their presentation, for the London stakeholders the final touches on a new user interface, and the absurd price of apartments in Knightsbridge. When the boarding call for their flight echoed softly through the lounge, they gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency. Their tickets were first-class Pod 1A and 1B, the most coveted seats on the Boeing 777. They had booked them 6 months in advance. The trip was not just business, it was a celebration, a moment to exhale after a grueling 18-month push. Walking down the jet bridge, the twins felt the familiar shift, the transition from the rarefied air of the lounge to the confined space of the aircraft, a metal tube where the unspoken rules of the ground were often amplified. They were accustomed to the double takes. Two elegant black women turning left into the first-class cabin. They saw the flicker of surprise, the momentary recalibration in the eyes of other passengers, and even the crew. They had learned long ago to meet it with an unwavering, pleasant confidence that dared anyone to question their right to be there. A flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Beatrice, greeted them with a tight, professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington, Ms. Washington." They settled into their pods, sleek, private cocoons of beige leather and polished chrome. The seats were spacious, converting into fully flat beds, each with its own oversized screen, a minibar, and a small closet. Nina immediately kicked off her heels, wiggling her toes in the plush carpeting. Maya was already connecting her laptop to the in-flight Wi-Fi, her mind never truly at rest. The cabin slowly filled around them. The low hum of the engines was a comforting promise of motion, of progress. They were on their way, soaring above the world that had so often tried to keep them grounded. They felt untouchable, secure in their success, wrapped in the quiet luxury they had earned. They had no idea that in less than 20 minutes, the gilded cage of first class would become a battlefield, and the battle they were about to fight would have consequences far beyond the cabin doors. The last of the first-class passengers had boarded, and the cabin door was about to be sealed. The atmosphere was a gentle murmur of clinking glasses as the pre-departure champagne was served, the rustle of newspapers, and the quiet clicks of laptops. Maya was deep into a quarterly earnings report, her brow furrowed in concentration. Nina was scrolling through design mock-ups for a new marketing campaign, a contented smile playing on her lips. It was then that Beatrice Finch, the lead flight attendant, approached their pods. Her professional smile from the boarding door had vanished, replaced by a strained, almost apologetic tension. She cleared her throat softly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Excuse me, Ms. Washingtons." Maya looked up, her focus broken. "Yes." Beatrice's eyes darted nervously between the two sisters. "I am so sorry for this inconvenience, but we have a bit of a seating issue. We need these two seats." Nina lowered her phone, her brow crinkling in confusion. "I'm sorry you need these seats. 1A and 1B, yes." Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We have a very high-tier platinum member who had a last-minute booking change. There was a mix-up. The system should have allocated these seats to him. We would be happy to reaccommodate you both in our premium economy cabin. It's still quite comfortable, and of course we would refund the difference and offer you significant travel vouchers for the trouble." The suggestion hung in the air, thick and insulting. Maya and Nina exchanged a look, a flash of communication that needed no words. They had seen this script before, in different settings, with different actors, but always the same plot. Their presence was being treated as provisional, their status as negotiable. "Let me be clear," Maya said, her voice calm, but with a sudden icy edge. "We booked these specific seats 6 months ago. We are not moving." Beatrice's face tightened. "Ma'am, I understand, but this is a special circumstance. This passenger is one of our most valued global clients. And what are we?" Nina interjected, her initial confusion hardening into indignation. "We paid for these seats. They are our seats. End of story." From the aisle, a man in his late 50s stepped forward. He was tall, dressed in a wrinkled but obviously expensive suit, his face florid and impatient. This was Harrison Gable. He gestured dismissively toward the twins. "Is there a problem here? Beatrice, I was assured this would be handled." Beatrice looked from Gable to the twins, her expression pleading. "Sir, I'm trying to resolve this." Gable looked directly at Maya and Nina, not with malice, but with a bland, infuriating sense of entitlement, as if he were addressing a logistical snag, not two human beings. "Look, ladies, I'm sure whatever vouchers they're offering are very generous. I have an incredibly important meeting in London. I need to be able to work and then sleep, and these are the only pods that allow for that. I'm sure you can understand. His assumption that they couldn't possibly have equally important reasons for being there, that their comfort was secondary, was the spark that lit the fuse. "No, Maya," said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She slowly closed her laptop. "We don't understand. We don't understand why our confirmed paid-for seats are suddenly up for negotiation. We don't understand why you believe your time is more valuable than ours. And we certainly don't understand why this is our problem to solve." The confrontation was now drawing quiet, curious glances from other passengers. The low hum of the cabin was replaced by a tense silence. A younger flight attendant hovered nervously in the background, wringing her hands. Beatrice tried again, her voice strained. "Please, let's not make a scene. It's a simple request. We're trying to provide the best customer service to all our passengers." "This isn't customer service," Nina snapped, her voice rising slightly. "This is discrimination. You looked at the two black women in the best seats on the plane and assumed we would be the easiest to displace. Did you ask the gentleman in 2A or the woman in 2F? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Beatrice flinched as if struck. It's not about that." "Isn't it?" Maya challenged, standing up slowly to her full height. She was not a tall woman, but at that moment she seemed to tower over the flight attendant. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like that." The captain, a man with silver hair and a weary expression, named Captain Davies, was summoned. He emerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of authority. He listened to Beatrice's whispered, frantic explanation, then turned to the twins. "Ladies," he said, his voice firm but tired, "we have a situation here. I am the captain of this aircraft, and for the sake of an on-time departure, I need you to cooperate with my crew." "Cooperation is a two-way street," Captain Maya replied, her gaze unwavering. "We will gladly cooperate once our contractual agreement with this airline for these specific seats is honored. We will not be bullied or intimidated into moving." Harrison Gable scoffed loudly. "This is ridiculous. For God's sake, just move them. Get security if you have to." The threat of security of being forcibly removed was the final straw. It was the ultimate humiliation, the weapon so often used to put people who looked like them in their place. Nina's hand was trembling slightly, a mixture of rage and adrenaline. Maya, however, grew preternaturally calm. The analytical part of her brain took over, processing the variables, assessing the threat, and formulating the optimal response. She knew this was no longer a negotiation. It was a power play. And she was about to call in her queen. The cabin had become a pressure cooker. Captain Davies stood in the aisle, his arms crossed a vein, pulsing in his temple. Harrison Gable hovered behind him, radiating indignant impatience. Beatrice Finch looked pale and shaken, her carefully constructed professional veneer crumbling. "This is your final chance to resolve this amicably," Captain Davies stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Either you accept the accommodation my crew has offered, or I will have to deplane you for non-compliance. We need to close the doors." The threat was explicit. They would be publicly shamed, escorted off the plane like criminals, all for refusing to relinquish seats they had every right to occupy. Nina felt a surge of panic. Their London meetings were critical. Being deplaned would be a logistical nightmare and a profound humiliation. She looked at her sister, her eyes wide with a silent question. "Do we fold, Maya?" met her gaze with a look of pure, unadulterated steel. There was no fear, only focus. She held up a single calming hand. "One moment, Captain," she said, her voice unnervingly serene. She reached into her Hermes handbag, retrieved her phone, and tapped the screen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence with which she acted was more powerful than any shout. She found the contact she was looking for and pressed call. She put the phone to her ear, her eyes locked on Captain Davies. "Who are you calling?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. My father Meyer replied simply. The name Robert Washington didn't mean anything to the crew of Ascendair Flight 112. To them he was just some father being called by a difficult passenger. But in the boardrooms of New York, London, and Tokyo, the name carried the weight of a titan. Robert Washington was not just a successful man. He was a force of nature. A legend in the world of private equity, he was the founder of Washington Capital Group, a firm with a portfolio that included everything from tech startups to manufacturing giants. He was sharp, ruthless in business, and fiercely protective of his family. And as fate would have it, Washington Capital Group had 3 years prior been the lead investor in the multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a portfolio of travel and leisure companies, which included a controlling 40% stake in Ascendair's parent corporation, Global Skies Alliance. He didn't just fly with the airline. In a very real sense, he owned it. "Hi, Dad," Maya said, her voice warm, betraying none of the tension in the cabin. "Sorry to bother you. I know it's early. Yes, we're on the plane." "No, not quite. We're having a bit of a problem, actually." She paused, listening. The entire cabin was now shamelessly eavesdropping. "We're on Ascendair Flight 112 to Heathrow. Seats 1A and 1B. The flight crew, led by a Captain Davies, is insisting we give up our confirmed seats for another passenger. They're threatening to have us removed from the flight if we don't comply." "Yes, I know. Unbelievable." Maya's expression was neutral, but her eyes, still fixed on the captain, held a glint of impending victory. "Could you—" She paused again. "Thank you, Dad. I'll put you on speaker. The captain is right here." She tapped her phone, and a voice, rich, powerful, and utterly devoid of panic, filled the quiet cabin. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "This is Robert Washington. To whom am I speaking?" Captain Davies, looking confused and annoyed, leaned down. "This is Captain Davies. Sir, with all due respect, this is a crew matter, not something to be resolved by a passenger's father." "Captain Davies," the voice cut in sharp as broken glass. "You are the commander of an aircraft owned by a company that is part of the Global Skies Alliance, correct?" "Yes, sir. My firm, Washington Capital, is the majority stakeholder in that alliance. That means when one of my daughters has a confirmed paid-for ticket, she is not a passenger. She is an owner, and you are for all intents and purposes her employee. Do you understand the chain of command we are dealing with now?" The colour drained from Captain Davies's face. Beatrice Finch looked like she was about to faint. Harrison Gable, who had been listening with a smug grin, suddenly looked deeply uncomfortable, as if realizing he had brought a knife to a nuclear war. "Sir," the captain stammered, "I wasn't aware." "You are now," Robert Washington's voice boomed from the phone. "My daughters will remain in their ticketed seats. You will instruct your crew to apologize for this disgraceful harassment. You will close the doors and you will depart for London without another word on the matter. When you land, you and your entire senior crew will be met by Claire Atkinson, the head of European operations for Ascendair. She will be handling your debriefing and your termination. Am I clear?" The word termination echoed through the silent cabin. It was brutal, swift, and absolute. There was no ambiguity. Captain Davies stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He looked at Maya, who simply raised an eyebrow, a silent, "Your move." The captain, utterly broken, could only manage a choked, crystal clear, "Sir." "Good," the voice said, and the line went dead. Maya slid her phone back into her bag. The silence that followed was profound. Harrison Gable shuffled backward, trying to melt into the bulkhead. Beatrice Finch stared into the middle distance, her career flashing before her eyes. Captain Davies, his face pale and slack, turned to Beatrice. "Get back to your station," he croaked. He then looked at the twins, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and resentment. "My sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding, Miss Washingtons." He then turned and walked back to the cockpit without another word. Beatrice gave them a final haunted look before turning to Gable. "Sir," she said, her voice a hollow whisper, "we have a seat for you in premium economy. 21C." Gable, thoroughly cowed, simply nodded and scurried away without a backward glance. The cabin doors were sealed, the engines spooled up. As the plane began its inexorable pushback from the gate, Nina finally let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She reached across the aisle and squeezed her sister's hand. "You were amazing," she whispered. Maya nodded, her expression grim. They gave us no choice. They had won. Their victory was total, their power affirmed. As the plane climbed into the sky, leaving the lights of New York behind, they felt a fierce, righteous vindication. They had stood their ground and been proven right. They had no way of knowing that the call that had just saved their seats had also detonated a bomb in the lives of 3 people, and the shrapnel was already hurtling on a trajectory they could never have predicted. The 8-hour flight to London was a study in surreal tension. The remaining flight attendants treated Maya and Nina with a fearful, almost reverential deference. Their champagne glasses were never empty, their requests met with instantaneous, trembling compliance. They were no longer passengers. They were royalty holding court in a travelling kingdom of fear. Beatrice Finch, the purser, and another senior attendant who had backed her up were nowhere to be seen. They had sequestered themselves in the galley, their careers already over at 35,000 feet. Upon landing at Heathrow, the twins' victory was swiftly cemented. As they disembarked, a woman in a sharp suit, her face a practiced mask of corporate concern, was waiting at the gate. "Ms. Washingtons, I'm Claire Atkinson. On behalf of Ascendair, I cannot apologize enough for the absolutely disgraceful treatment you endured." Captain Davies and his senior crew were pulled aside before they even reached the terminal, their faces ashen as they were led away by Atkinson's assistants. The justice was as swift and merciless as Robert Washington had promised. The story, however, was just beginning. A passenger in the business class cabin, a freelance journalist, had overheard the entire exchange, including the speakerphone call. By the time Maya and Nina had cleared customs, his version of the events was already rocketing across the internet. The headline was electrifying tech moguls Maya and Nina Washington stand up to airline crew in first-class race row. The narrative was perfect. 2 brilliant self-made black women, symbols of a new generation of power, refusing to be intimidated. The story went viral. It was picked up by every major news outlet from the BBC to CNN. Their faces were everywhere. They were hailed as heroes, icons of defiance against systemic prejudice. Hashtags like "Yo Washington Sisters" and "Oh, Ascendair shame" trended for days. Nina, with her natural flair for public relations, masterfully guided the narrative. In a carefully worded statement, she expressed their disappointment in Ascendair, but emphasized a broader point. This was never about a seat. It was about the quiet, pervasive assumption that our success is temporary and our rights are negotiable. We hope this incident encourages others to stand firm when they know they are in the right. The public response was a tidal wave of support. Ascendair went into full-blown crisis mode. Their stock price dipped 8% in 2 days. The CEO issued a public video apology, promising a full-scale review of their diversity and inclusion training. The firings of Captain Davies, Beatrice Finch, and 2 other crew members were publicly confirmed, framed as a necessary step to restore faith in the airline's commitment to equality. For a week, the twins were the toast of London. They were invited for interviews, their story leading news broadcasts. Their business meetings, already important, took on an air of celebrity. Investors were even more eager to be associated with them. They weren't just brilliant entrepreneurs anymore. They were cultural icons. Nina reveled in it. She saw it as a powerful, albeit unexpected marketing tool for their brand. "People see us as fighters. Maya," she said, one evening in their suite at the Savoy. "They see us as people who don't back down." That's a powerful image for Nexus Health. It's about strength, resilience, fighting for what's right. Maya was more circumspect. The analytical part of her brain, the part that saw patterns and questioned assumptions, felt a faint, disquieting hum beneath the roar of public acclaim. She felt the victory, the vindication, but there was a nagging detail that didn't quite fit. It was just the look on that woman's face, Maya said, quietly, staring out at the glittering lights along the Thames. Beatrice. She didn't look hateful. She looked desperate. She was desperate to keep her job after making a racist assumption and getting called on it, Nina countered, dismissing it. "Don't feel sorry for her, May. She made her bed. We didn't fire her. Her own prejudice did." And for a while, Maya accepted that. It was the simplest, most logical explanation. They were in the right. The world agreed. The crew was in the wrong. The airline agreed. The case was closed. They completed their business in London with spectacular success, securing a partnership with a major UK healthcare trust. They flew back to New York on a different airline, of course, to a hero's welcome. They were champions of a cause, and the spoils of war were sweet. The memory of the confrontation on Flight 112 began to fade, softened by the glow of public adoration and professional triumph. The names of Beatrice Finch and Captain Davies became footnotes in a story about their own strength. They believed the chapter was over, but their actions had not simply closed a door on 3 careers. They had kicked one open, and through that door, the first whispers of a different, more complicated truth were beginning to seep unnoticed into their triumphant world. The karma they had unknowingly set in motion was not about punishment from the heavens. It was colder, more patient, and rooted in the one thing Maya's analytical mind had failed to account for the full story. 3 weeks passed. The media storm subsided into a steady, favorable breeze. The Washington sisters were no longer front-page news, but their story had become part of the cultural lexicon, a go-to example of how to handle corporate racism. For Nina, the incident was a closed loop of success. A problem was encountered, confronted, and conquered. She had moved on, focusing their company's newfound publicity into a powerful recruitment and marketing drive. Maya, however, couldn't shake the feeling of a loose thread. It was the data point that didn't fit the model. It was the quiet, persistent hum of an anomaly in an otherwise perfect equation. It was the memory of Beatrice Finch's eyes, not filled with the smug superiority of a bigot, but with a raw, panicked desperation that Maya's intuition couldn't reconcile with the public narrative. The first crack in their perfect victory appeared not with a bang, but with a whisper. It arrived in Maya's inbox via a forwarded link from a Google alert she had set up for a send air firing. The link wasn't from a major news source. It was from a small local online newspaper in suburban New Jersey, the kind of outlet that mostly reports on town council meetings and high school sports. The headline read, "Community Rallies for Former Flight Attendant, Fired in High-Profile Incident." Curiosity piqued, Maya clicked. The article was short and sympathetic. It painted a portrait of Beatrice Finch, not as a corporate villain, but as a 48-year-old single mother of two, a 25-year veteran of the airline industry who had never had a single complaint filed against her. She was described by neighbors as kind, hard-working, and dedicated. The article mentioned she was now struggling to find work, blacklisted by the industry, and facing foreclosure on her modest home. But it was the last paragraph that made Maya's blood run cold. Friends have set up a GoFundMe page to help Ms. Finch with mounting expenses, particularly the astronomical medical bills for her 10-year-old son, Leo, who suffers from a rare and aggressive form of juvenile myelomonocytic leukemia and is awaiting a critical procedure at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. Great Ormond Street. London. The word slammed into Maya with the force of a physical blow. A coincidence, it was possible, but it was too neat, too specific. Her mind, trained to connect disparate pieces of information, began to race. A desperate woman, a flight to London, a sick child in a London hospital. She quickly found the GoFundMe page. The photo showed a smiling, pale boy with no hair, his arm around Beatrice, who looked years younger and infinitely happier. The fundraising goal was a staggering $250,000. The text described Leo's rare blood cancer and the family's last-ditch effort to get him into a trial program for a revolutionary bone marrow transplant, a procedure pioneered by a world-renowned specialist. The page had been active for months, but in the last 3 weeks, it had been flooded with hateful, abusive comments. Serves this racist witch right. Maybe if you hadn't tried to kick those women off the plane, you could afford your kids' treatment. Karma's a BT chick lady. Maya felt a wave of nausea. The digital mob, spurred on by their story, had found a new target. She scrolled through the updates on the page, her heart pounding. An update from 2 weeks ago, posted by Beatrice's sister, was a cry of despair. Coddetor on Leo. We have suffered a devastating setback. The specialist who was scheduled to perform Leo's preliminary consultation and surgery in London had to cancel at the last minute. He was not on his scheduled flight. We are praying we can find a way to get him here in time. Every day counts. Please keep Leo in your thoughts. He was not on his scheduled flight. The hum in Maya's mind became a deafening siren. She opened a new browser tab, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She searched for the world's leading pediatric specialists in juvenile myelomonocytic leukemia. The list was short. Only a handful of surgeons on the planet were capable of performing the highly experimental procedure Leo needed. At the very top of that list, with his picture smiling blandly from a university hospital profile, was a name that made her gasp. Dr. Harrison Gable, the man from the plane, the entitled impatient passenger they had so thoroughly vanquished. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a collision, a terrible, catastrophic collision of narratives where they had only seen their own. The very high-tier platinum member, the special circumstance, the incredibly important meeting in London. It hadn't been a business meeting. It had been a surgery to save a child's life. Maya felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The entire incident replayed in her mind, but now viewed through a horrifying new lens. Beatrice's desperation wasn't about appeasing a wealthy passenger. It was a frantic, clumsy attempt to get a miracle worker onto a plane. The airline had likely bent its own rules in a desperate off-the-books attempt to accommodate the surgeon, who probably had been a last-minute addition to the flight after another had been cancelled. The crew's story of a mix-up was a weak, poorly executed cover, likely designed to avoid panic or a violation of medical privacy. They had needed those specific pod seats, the only ones with a fully flat bed, so Dr. Gable could sleep and be rested for a complex life-or-death operation. And she and Nina wrapped in their own righteous indignation, had seen only the color of his skin and the color of theirs. They had interpreted a desperate plea as a racist slight. They had used the full crushing weight of their father's power to enforce their rights, and in doing so, had potentially signed a death warrant for a 10-year-old boy. She ran to the bathroom and was violently sick. The victory, the public adoration, the feeling of vindication, it all curdled into shame and horror. She stumbled back into the living room, her mind reeling. She had to tell Nina. She found her sister in the Home Office, laughing on a call with their PR agent. Nina looked up, her smile bright and triumphant. "You won't believe it, Maya Forbes just called. They want to put us on the cover. The Washington Warriors changing the face of tech." Maya stared at her sister, at the chasm that had just opened between them. How could she tell her? How could she explain that their heroic victory was a lie, a terrible, tragic mistake built on a foundation of their own unshakable certainty? Their war had not been against a racist system, but against a terrified mother trying to save her son. And they hadn't just won, they had annihilated her. "No," Nina said, her voice flat. She shook her head, a denial that was both fierce and fragile. "No, that's impossible. It's a trick. They're making it up to get sympathy, to get their jobs back." Maya had laid it all out for her, the local news article, the GoFundMe page, the heartbreaking updates, the profile of Dr. Harrison Gable. She had presented the evidence with the same methodical precision she used for a board meeting, but her voice was shaking. They were in the living room of their shared penthouse, the glittering New York skyline, a cruel, indifferent backdrop to the ugly truth unraveling between them. "Nina, look at the dates," Maya insisted, pushing her tablet across the marble coffee table. "The GoFundMe was created 8 months ago. The updates about Leo's condition, the desperate search for a surgeon, the hope pinned on this London trial, it's all there. It predates our flight by months. This isn't a story they invented last week." Nina refused to look. She paced the room, her silk robe trailing behind her like a royal train. "So it's a coincidence, a tragic, horrible coincidence. That doesn't mean we were wrong. They still tried to kick us out of our seats. They were unprofessional. They were disrespectful. The reason for it doesn't change the fact of it." "It changes everything," Maya cried, standing up to face her. "It changes the intent. We built this entire narrative, our entire public victory, on the idea that this was a racially motivated act. We accused them, Nina. We destroyed their careers based on that assumption. But what if the assumption was wrong? What if they were just incompetent at handling an impossible situation? What if they were trying to save a child's life, and we just got in the way?" The chasm between them widened. For Nina, the narrative was her shield. It had protected her, empowered her. To accept Maya's discovery was to accept that she, Nina Washington, celebrated icon of racial justice, might actually be the villain in someone else's tragedy. It was an idea too monstrous to contemplate. "So what do you want to do?" "Maya." Nina shot back, her voice laced with defensive fury. "Call Forbes and tell them to cancel the cover issue, a press release, saying sorry we made a catastrophic error in judgment our bad. That would destroy us. Everything we've built, Nexus Health, our reputation, it would all be gone." "Is our reputation more important than the truth?" Maya asked, her voice a pained whisper. "Is it more important than that little boy's life? We have to do something. We have to find out if he's okay." Their conflict, their first real fundamental disagreement, simmered for days. Nina retreated into a fortress of denial, focusing on work on the Forbes photo shoot, on the triumphant narrative she refused to relinquish. Maya, meanwhile, became an obsessive investigator, consumed by a desperate need for facts for absolution. She used her resources. She hired a private investigator in New Jersey, a discreet professional named Frank Costello, to verify the details of Beatrice Finch's life. The report came back within 48 hours, and it was devastatingly conclusive. Everything was true. The house facing foreclosure, the mountain of medical debt, the son named Leo, whose life hung by a thread. Frank also confirmed the doctor. Gable had been booked on Flight 112 at the last minute by the hospital after his original flight was cancelled due to a mechanical issue. Ascendair had indeed tried to quietly make it work. The final damning piece of information came from a source deep within the London healthcare system, a connection Maya made through a Nexus Health Board member. Dr. Gable had missed the crucial window for Leo's preliminary procedure. The boy's condition was so fragile that the transplant had to be postponed indefinitely. He had been sent home. His condition was deteriorating. The weight of it was crushing. Maya felt like a fraud. Every congratulatory email, every laudatory news article was a fresh stab of guilt. The Forbes cover story felt like a monument to her own arrogance. She knew she couldn't force Nina. This was something she had to do herself. She had to face the consequences of her actions, of their actions. She booked a flight to New Jersey. She found Beatrice Finch's address from Frank's report. She knew she couldn't just write a check. Atonement required more than money. It required bearing witness. It required confession. As she drove her rental car through the quiet, tree-lined streets of a middle-class New Jersey suburb, the contrast with her own life was stark. She was on her way to a modest single-story house with peeling paint on the shutters, a home she had helped push toward foreclosure. She was about to face a woman whose life she had publicly and celebratedly ruined. She parked the car across the street, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. For a long time, she just sat there, watching the house. A light was on in the front window. She could see the silhouette of a woman inside. This was the karma. It wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It was a slow, sickening realization in a quiet rental car on a suburban street. It was the knowledge that her certainty had been a weapon, and she had aimed it at the wrong target, causing damage she could never fully undo. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Maya Washington, the titan of tech, the warrior of justice, got out of the car. She felt smaller and more powerless than she had ever felt in her life. She walked up the cracked concrete path and rang the doorbell, not knowing if the woman on the other side would greet her with rage, with tears, or with the empty, soul-shattering look of someone who had already lost everything. The drive to suburban New Jersey was a pilgrimage through a world Maya Washington had only ever viewed from 30,000 feet. The manicured lawns, the identical mailboxes, the quiet, unassuming rhythm of life. It all felt alien, a diorama of a reality she had helped shatter. With every passing mile marker on the turnpike, the cocoon of her own life, the glass towers of Manhattan, the hushed art galleries, the effortless luxury seemed to recede, replaced by a raw, gnawing anxiety. This was not a business negotiation or a hostile takeover. There were no leverage points, no strategies, no acceptable losses. There was only a debt to be paid, and she suspected the currency required was a piece of her own soul. She parked her discreetly rented sedan across the street from the address Frank Costello's report had provided. The house was exactly as she'd imagined, yet somehow more heartbreaking. It was a modest, single-story home, its blue paint faded by years of sun and snow. A child's bicycle lay on its side, in the patchy grass, a poignant symbol of a life interrupted. She could see the peeling paint on the window frames, the slight sag in the gutter, small signs of a family whose resources and attention were entirely consumed by a far more urgent crisis. For a long, paralyzing 10 minutes, she simply sat the engine off her hands, gripping the leather steering wheel. She watched a light flicker on in the living room, a silhouette moving past the window, and imagined the life contained within those walls, a life that now had her, an unwitting villain woven into its tragic tapestry. This was the karma. Not a sudden dramatic bolt of lightning, but this slow, sickening descent into understanding. It was the quiet horror of realizing that your personal Everest was built on the rubble of someone else's home. Gathering a breath that felt thin and insufficient, Maya Washington, the woman who could command billion-dollar valuations with a single presentation, got out of the car. She felt unsteady, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the soft lawn as she walked up the cracked concrete path. Each step was a judgment. She raised a trembling hand and rang the doorbell, the simple chime sounding like a verdict in the unnerving quiet. The door swung open, and Beatrice Finch stood there. The 3 weeks since the flight had ravaged her. The crisp uniform was gone, replaced by a faded, oversized cardigan pulled tightly around a frame that seemed to have shrunk. The exhaustion Maya had seen in her eyes on the plane had metastasized, carving deep, dark circles into her pale face. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock, then a flicker of fear. Finally, it all settled into a profound, hollow weariness that was worse than any accusation. "Ms. Washington," Beatrice said. Her voice was not the strained professional tone from the aircraft, but a dry, brittle rasp. "What are you doing here? Have you come to finish the job?" The bitter question hung in the air between them. "May I come in, Miss Finch?" Maya asked, her own voice barely a whisper. "Please, I need to talk to you." Beatrice stared for a long moment, a silent battle playing out across her features. Then, with a sigh that seemed to drain the last of her fight, she stepped aside. The house inside was small, meticulously clean, but filled with the invisible weight of sickness and grief. Family photos were clustered on the mantelpiece, a shrine to happier times, most featuring the bright, toothy grin of the boy Maya recognized as Leo. On a small end table, a stack of envelopes with red past-due warnings sat beneath a coffee mug. The air was heavy with the sterile scent of antiseptic, a smell Maya associated with hospitals, not homes. "My son is resting," Beatrice said, her voice flat, preempting any loud noises. The trip back from London was hard on him. Leo. Maya breathed the name, grounding herself. "I came here to ask about him." "How is he?" The question, laced with a genuine, desperate concern, seemed to pierce through Beatrice's hardened exterior. Her carefully maintained composure crumbled. Her shoulders, which had been held in a posture of rigid defense, slumped. She sank onto the edge of a worn floral armchair, as if her legs could no longer support her. "Not good," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the carpet. They sent him home. The specialist, Dr. Gable. He couldn't perform the procedure. Leo's white cell count was too high by the time a new slot could be found. They said the window. We missed the window for the transplant. She delivered the line without inflection, a simple statement of fact that was more devastating than any scream. She didn't need to connect the dots. They both knew who had sealed that window shut. Maya remained standing in the center of the room, a monument of shame in her tailored suit. "I know," she said, her voice thick. "I know everything. I know about Dr. Gable. I know why you needed those seats for him. And I am. God, I am so sorry." The apology, the words she had rehearsed 1,000 times on the drive over, felt utterly pathetic. They were a pebble tossed into a canyon of ruin. Sorry, Beatrice looked up, and for the first time, a hot, bright spark of anger ignited in her exhausted eyes. It was a relief. Anger was something Maya could understand. The hollow despair was not. Sorry doesn't bring my son's miracle back. Sorry doesn't unfire me from a job I held for 25 years. You and your sister, you went on a victory tour. You sat on television looking so proud, so righteous, and you called me a racist. You let the entire world label me a racist. Her voice began to tremble with a rage born of helplessness. I have people leaving hateful comments on my son's GoFundMe page, my sick son's page. They tell me it's karma for what I did to you. I get letters in the mail. My neighbors cross the street when they see me. I can't get hired anywhere. They see my name, they Google it, and that's it. Your story is the first thing that comes up. The story of the racist flight attendant. She gestured wildly around the room. This house is all we have left, and the bank is taking it. All of this. All of it because I was trying clumsily and stupidly to get a doctor on a plane to save my boy's life. I didn't know Maya pleaded the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, hot and useless. I swear to you, if I had known even a fraction of the truth, I would have given him my seat. Your seat, every seat on that plane. We saw. We reacted to a pattern we have seen our entire lives. We saw a white man's comfort being prioritized over ours, and we assumed the worst. We fought back. That wasn't a fight. Beatrice shot back, rising to her feet, her small frame vibrating with fury. A fight is between two people with a chance to win. You didn't fight Miss Washington. You executed me. You had a nuclear weapon, your father's power, and you used it because your feelings were hurt. You didn't ask questions. You didn't look for the truth. You just cared about winning. And you won. I hope you're enjoying the view from the top. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, and Maya accepted them all. Because they were true. In that cabin, blinded by a lifetime of legitimate grievances, she had defaulted to her most basic programming: identify the threat, neutralize it, win. She had not paused to consider that the threat might be a mirage, a misinterpretation of a far more tragic story. She stood there and took it, letting Beatrice's raw, unfiltered pain wash over her, until the anger was spent, leaving only shuddering sobs. When the storm passed, leaving a hollowed-out silence in its wake, Maya finally spoke again, her voice steady and resolved. "I cannot undo what I've done," she said, her tone stripped of all artifice. "The damage to your name, the pain this has caused you, some of that is permanent, and I will have to live with that. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to fix what I can. I swear to you, whatever it takes." The first call was to her father. It was the most difficult conversation of her life. She stood in the sterile quiet of her rental car and laid out the entire sordid truth, her voice breaking, as she confessed their catastrophic error. Robert Washington was silent on the other end of the line for a long time, the static crackling like judgment. When he finally spoke, his powerful voice was heavy with a grim understanding. He too had acted on assumption, a father's protective instinct overriding due diligence. His power, unfiltered by facts, had been a wrecking ball. Then the formidable Washington machine, which had been deployed for destruction, was retasked for restoration. Lawyers were dispatched, faced with incontrovertible evidence from hospital records, airline manifests, and a sworn statement from a guilt-ridden Dr. Gable Ascender's legal team, knew they were facing a corporate catastrophe. They settled within days. Beatrice Finch received a private 8-figure payment, and more importantly, a full public exoneration. The airline issued a carefully worded statement, about a grievous misunderstanding of a time-sensitive medical situation, and her record was cleared. But money couldn't cure cancer. Maya leveraged every contact in the Nexus Health network, convening a virtual consortium of the world's leading pediatric oncologists. Dr. Gable, desperate for his own atonement, led the effort working pro bono. They pored over Leo's files and found a sliver of hope, a new, highly experimental CAR T-cell therapy being trialed in Berlin. It was riskier than the transplant, but it was a chance. The call to Nina was a firestorm. You did what Nina shrieked through the phone from New York. You went to her house. Are you insane, Maya? You've given her ammunition to destroy us. She has no interest in destroying us, Nina. Maya said tiredly. She just wants her son to live. The Forbes cover. I'm killing it. No, you will not. That cover is the culmination of everything we've worked for. It's our shield. Don't you dare throw that away because you're feeling guilty. It's a monument to a lie, Maya said softly. I can't live with that. The rift between them was no longer a crack. It was a canyon. Nina saw Maya's actions as a total betrayal, an unforgivable act of self-sabotage that threatened to undo everything they had built. She couldn't see past the potential ruin to the moral imperative. Maya made the call to Forbes anyway. She told the editor-in-chief the entire unvarnished story. The story was killed, the cover pulled at an enormous cost. The Washington Warriors were no more. 6 months passed. They were months of silence and penance. Maya poured herself into her work, but the fire was gone, replaced by a sober, humbling sense of purpose. The news from Berlin came only in terse, third-hand updates from the lead doctor. Then one autumn afternoon, a postcard arrived at her office. The picture was of the Brandenburg Gate, lit up at dusk. She turned it over. On the back, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, were 3 words. He's in remission. There was no signature. None was needed. Maya Washington placed the postcard on her desk, not in a frame, but standing on its own, a simple, stark reminder. It was a testament not to her power, but to its immense, terrifying cost. She had won the battle on the plain, but the victory had been hollow. The real reckoning came not in a public forum, but in the quiet, lifelong work of rebuilding a world she had so carelessly, so righteously broken. The story of Maya and Nina Washington isn't a simple tale of right and wrong. It's a chilling reminder of how our own experiences can create blind spots, how righteousness can curdle into arrogance, and how the truth is often far more complex than the narratives we build. They won their battle at 30,000 feet, but in the process, they nearly lost something far more valuable, their humanity. Their story forces us to ask a difficult question when we are certain we are in the right. How far are we willing to go? And what collateral damage are we willing to accept? What might we be missing? This is the kind of story that stays with you, that makes you question your own assumptions. If this story moved you and made you think, please hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates complex, true-to-life drama. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that dig beneath the headlines to find the difficult, powerful truths.